this session with some speakers from both Canada and the US. A couple of things: we do aim to be about an hour long on the session, and we do offer 1 CEU credit in nutrient management. So if you're a certified crop advisor, I will post the QR code at the end of the session for you. We also do record these sessions and make them available afterwards, both on manuremanager.com and on Field Crop News, which is the OMAFRA YouTube channel, where you can find them posted also. Okay, so I think we'll get started. We're going to jump right into this topic because we've got 3 presenters, and I know each one of them can talk, and they have are going to have a good interaction here as we look at Uber Manure. So Mel, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and share your screen, and I'll introduce Mel quickly here as our first speaker. Mel Limas, who is the Executive Director of OPACA, OPACA being the Ontario Professional Agri-Contractors Association. Mel's background, not just in agriculture, but also in sociology, and you will see that come out in her presentation. So Mel, go ahead and start us off.
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone, or whenever you're watching this. Yeah, we're talking about buying and selling manure, or Uber Manure, trademark pending. But I wanted to talk quick about OPACA. The Ontario Professional Agri-Contractors Association started in 2017 due to a manure-related issue here in Ontario. And we're a voice for contractors and manure applicators across Ontario. I'm actually pleasantly surprised by the amount of collaboration between these contractors. And if you think about the amount of manure that's spread in our province, it's estimated that 50% maybe are applied by contractors. So it's important when we're talking about manure that we do factor in the manure applicators. So we're here talking about manure exchange programs or buy and sell programs. I did a little research and I found that there are a few related to soil and water conservation districts in the US. For the most part, I found quite a few there, but they're really small. Montgomery had 6 people listed that would have manure that you could buy, and I think the majority of them were horse manure. Here, and you can see the manure exchange service from Marion Soil and Water Conservation District. It is a PDF that has everyone's name, address, deepest fears, their phone number, and all of that, just for the world to see. So not anonymous whatsoever, the people that did have manure to sell. So, but and a Facebook group, there's a few Facebook groups starting. The one had 7 people in it. So we can see that it's very small, but I also get that we are talking about 2 completely different scales here. They were talking about cubic yards that they could have manure available to be bought, and I was like, okay, this is not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about backyard gardens. We're talking about a lot of manure that needs to move to a different place. This is Harvey Martin, one of our members with OPACA. It got me thinking, if there was a demand for a manure exchange service, wouldn't it exist already? Like this lemonade stand. I think if we were getting any customers, they'd have been here by now. It got me thinking, okay, well, let's look at why it doesn't already exist, because I think that's going to be important to understanding how to make it work in the future. And as Andrew explained, I work with farmers a lot, and with OPACA and a lot of other groups. And I don't know too much about manure, but I do know a lot about people from studying sociology. And there are practical reasons why it could be difficult to do a manure program like this. But there's also, it's all in between our ears kind of problems. First off is that farmers might not actually know, it might surprise you, but we don't always know our phosphorus rates in the soil. A lot of farmers, especially livestock farmers that I've talked to, just solely rely on their crop advisors to determine their fertilizer requirements, even if they don't need fertilizer like at all in terms of the phosphorus. So there's that. People might not know that they have too much. And they might not know that they could even sell it. They might be in a community where everyone around them also has manure. So there's not an easy access to a place that could take it. But the most important thing to understand about humans, then this is what a master's degree in sociology will give you, is that humans are not logical, like at all. We consistently work against our own best interests, and you can see it in our personal lives as well. I like to think one man's trash is also his treasure. Like I don't know, as soon as there's a kind of a funny thing at play, if you knew the value of manure, maybe you'd actually be more reluctant to sell it. So I think this is just important to understand that hoarding. And if you think you're not a hoarder, I just have to look at the junkyard graveyard behind me right here. We all keep stuff. And I think it's also important to know that it is happening now. It's just happening not formally like the conservation districts, but informally. This is a tweet from Highland Wayne, just a picture of a giant manure pit that he built just to take digestate. But he said, if anyone in the area has like too much right now and you need some overflow, I could maybe help you out by taking it. It does happen informally. I talked to some of our members that are contractors, and they're informally brokering, who has manure, who needs some. I don't think they're actually making a cut on it because they are doing the application themselves. So it's in their best interest to keep getting manure out on the land. It's this adding organic amendments to soil is in Ontario. It is a cost share program up to $10,000 here. It says, so if you need some nutrients, you could buy manure or digestate or something like that and get it cost shared. Unfortunately, I don't know much about how that program has went because there's not that much information under lock and key behind soil and crop. But there's tools. We have the tools with AgriSuite here, and Iowa Manure Management Action Group have the tools to put a value on how much manure is worth. So we have the tools. I think another important thing to talk about with the hesitancy is to formalize things is that it really is about supply and demand. I've heard anywhere from deals that farmers are paying other people to take their manure to other people like paying for manure. So you get the whole gamut here. So I think whenever you're formalizing an informal market, there's always going to be a bit of pushback just because there's some people that are making, a good deal. So the other thing is that manure is very different. And here I want to breeze through this now because I think we can discuss this later. And this was based on fertilizer prices from like 3 years ago. So in some cases, this might be triple. But this is just to indicate that like dairy and beef and poultry manure they're all very, very different in terms of their nutrient content, but also how much it costs to haul it and how much it costs to apply it. And it really, it does depend where you are, because around Tillsonburg, Simcoe area, ginseng growers will pay for beef manure from like several kilometers away, like an hour drive even, I heard. So versus in where I'm from, around Wellington, Waterloo area, pretty much everyone has manure. So you can't truck it more than, I don't know, some say 10 kilometers. No one would ever go more than that. So I think that's also interesting to note and important to note that not all manure is created differently. And the difference between the weight between beef and poultry is that poultry has less weight on each load. So that's some cost that the custom operator needs to take into consideration. The other thing is selling China to China now. That's going to be a challenge. When it comes to supply and demand, people often say this, it's only people that have manure that know the value of manure. So people that are even buying compost, for example, maybe had manure in the past and they know the value of those micronutrients. And so it might be interesting to see how this manure buy and sell goes, if it's actually just trading different types of manure, for example, or at different times when you can get it. So things to keep in mind. I think it would be interesting to talk about how to get dewatering, because to get it further afield, we might need to work in some biodigesters or some dewatering plants in areas that have high concentrations of manure to get it out, because there's not an economic reason they could do it otherwise. And my last slide here, don't laugh, but no, we all use apps. Well, not all of us use apps. And I thought I started with Tinder here because it's all about meeting people that are pretty close to you that you wouldn't meet otherwise. Because in this case, like there are, especially in these informal exchanges that we already know about, especially manure for straw, it's just your neighbors. You're just talking to your neighbors. You don't need an app for that. But I think we might need an app or something like that. That's maybe like it's connecting people with neighbors that you don't know that you should know. Kijiji, for example, I'm sure most of you would know about it, but it's like having a garage sale, but you don't actually have to put all of your stuff out on your driveway for everyone to see. It's kind of a more discreet way of selling things. And I think that that'll be important, is where's the anonymity of people that are buying and selling manure. Free Cycle is also a similar kind of platform from Kijiji. Facebook Marketplace is really common around small communities where there's just sort of like an informal buy and sell. And Get Soils, I wanted to put a plug out for them too. It's an online platform where they're connecting people that have excess soil with people that might take it. Obviously, there's a huge amount of regulations around that. And so those are kind of built into the app itself. So I thought that might be something, it could be the base of a platform for, Get Manures, especially if there's going to be regulatory issues related to it. So the other thing, one last thing, is that the people that currently sell amendments could have an issue with an app replacing their jobs. So I think that's also important to take into consideration, is what that's going to mean for the current existing networks that exist. So what if it was like an online network that connected people with personal networks in the farm community, and maybe we could have sort of a hybrid version. So this is all hypothetical. We're going to talk more later and have a discussion of what it could look like. Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
That's awesome, Mel. Appreciate that start to get us thinking about some things, thinking outside of the box a bit. That's what we wanted. So let's continue this conversation. And I'll introduce our second speaker, Andy DeVries. And Andy, he's bringing both sides of the equation from the farmer, because he's a partner in a farm operation near Mitchell, Ontario, which is involved in livestock and cash crop, I believe. And then also, there's well known across Ontario the consulting firm CropQuest that Andy is a partner in. Many of you will be familiar with that if you're on this side of the border. And so he can speak to both sides of that, but particularly from the consultant point of view and their experience. So Andy, I'll turn it over to you. And a reminder to everybody, your questions, we're looking for questions. You can post them in the chat anywhere along the line here, and we'll pull those out at the end. Okay, go ahead, Andy.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to basically concentrate on the value of manure and the value of manure to our operation. We don't have any livestock, but we buy a lot of manure for our cash crop operation. We're south of Mitchell, between Mitchell and Stratford, and we grow an amount of edible beans, and that's where the real value of manure seems to have shone. So we like to buy, if we can find it, broiler manure, but it's hard to find. And we also buy liquid finishing, hog finishing manure out of out under barn storages. And just explain how we do that. So far, it's been mostly trucked to a nurse tank. We'll set up a nurse tank at a 200-acre field or 150-acre field, and the trucks will bring the manure to the nurse tank, and we pump, or we don't do it. We have a custom operator do it, does it, and they pump about 80,000 gallons an hour, and we will pull a sample every hour out of the nurse tank and make a composite sample, and that goes to the lab, and we pay based on the analysis of that sample. So when we're buying, because of the rotation we have, we like to put it on after wheat harvest before we plant oats. So we're not paying for the nitrogen, but people are looking to move manure at that time of year. So we pay on the P and K values, and I've done some calculations. We had a meeting with our input suppliers last Friday, and anybody that's in the cropping business has experienced the same thing, jaw-dropping price increases, I guess. So if I take 1,000 gallons of under the barn manure storage for liquid hog manure, last spring or last summer, I would have paid $34.69 per 1,000 gallons, and that's included the nitrogen because I wanted it for the oats and in this coming spring, if I were to apply it before planting corn, I would be paying about $75 per 1,000 gallons. And when we buy broiler manure this coming spring, based on the analysis that we've done this fall, 1 ton of broiler manure is going to be worth about $102.90 a ton. So let's say, a 13-ton spreader is probably about $1,340 per load. But the value truly is there if you're growing the kind of crops that we grow. The edible beans are the ones that really respond to the micronutrients in the manure. And to get a handle on what kind of micronutrients are in a gallon of manure or 1,000 gallons, you just the simplest way is to get a vitamin mineral premix tag, which comes on a bulk bag or small bags, or whatever. Just look at the analysis, and probably 80% of that goes right to the animal and ends up in the manure. That's where we get the micros, and that's what really seems to enhance the root system of the edible bean crops. And it's just it's hard to put a number on it, but it works, and we've used it for years. And so that's we base our price on the analysis. When we have people moving broiler manure for us, they have a large payloader, and they would have a scale on the payloader, so we know exactly how many tons we're getting at the end of the run, and we'll sample as we go, and we pay based on that sample. So I don't think a lot of broiler producers, I shouldn't paint everybody with the same brush, but I think there's broiler producers out there that don't realize the value of their manure behind their broiler barn, especially when they've been feeding 100 or 200 acres of their own for however long, 25, 30 years. They don't need it, and they really don't need it. And there's a lot of value there. So, but it's a matter of putting the value on it and getting people to recognize the value for it, which, like Chris Brown said, there's nothing that makes nutrient management more acceptable than high fertilizer.
I think she's going to look and see about St. Vincent's.
So as far as the moving manure from farm to farm, we tried on our CropQuest website several years ago to put a platform on there, and we called it Nutrient Exchange Site, and we basically got zero response. And maybe we're not ready for that yet, but I still think it's an awareness out there that farmers aren't aware of what the value they have in their pits or behind their broiler barns. And I think once they realize that value, they're going to start looking at it more closely. And another thought we had at the time when we did the nutrient exchange table was perhaps we should put it together with other commodities like hay and straw. People are looking to move from farm to farm. That might be possible as well. And that's I'll wait for questions, but that's basically how we buy manure. And we had a hard time, or I shouldn't say, we had when we first started buying manure 15 years ago, people were kind of raising their eyebrows as to why would we pay for something that people are looking to get rid of. But now it's 15 years later, we're almost bidding against some of our cash crop neighbors for manure. So the mindset has changed somewhat. But anyways, as far as what Mel was alluded to there, I think people in the custom manure hauling business or in the nutrient management consulting business end up as brokers for manure unknowingly. We never monetize it, but you know, one example we have is a client of ours north of London. That's they're feeding about 9,000 head of cattle, and we're producing on one feedlot 264 tons of manure a day. So you know, we hooked them up with a lot of people in the neighborhoods within 10-15 miles of there to get rid of that volume of manure. It's about 5 tractor trailer loads a day, and it's on-farm storage, on-site storage. So I think as contractors and consultants, we unknowingly broker manure already. We've had cases where we have dairy farmer south of Woodstock that has actually built a tank that was 30% larger than what he need, and you know, there's manure coming and going there all the time from neighbors who have a shortage of storage. So, but I think this next speaker is going to be really interesting to some of the up and coming farms with just the fact that moving manure at the right time of year, just basically you get a 9,000 gallon tanker on the back of a highway tractor. That does a lot of damage to paved back roads, and with the pipeline thing catching people's interest, I think that's really long term is going to be very interesting to a lot of operators. I'll leave it at that and answer any questions I can later.
That's perfect. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, dig in a little bit deeper, and we start to hear some of the numbers, and appreciate that. That's very good. And you've led in nicely to where our next speaker is going to go, and that's Glenn Arnold, who's a field specialist at Ohio State University. And we appreciate Glenn joining us today as well. Go ahead, Glenn. So we're not hearing you at this point.
There
Glenn.
we go.
There. Okay.
How about now? I got myself unmuted.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, super.
Now I can't see you though, but that's
All
your
right.
choice. If you can.
Not sure how to change that right now either.
Well, we can hear you. Drive on.
All righty. They asked me to talk a little bit about possibly using pipelines to transport manure. I'm going to tell you right out front, that's not necessarily my forte at the university, but it did make me crunch some numbers and look at some possibilities over the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to talk about what we've got, what we found. Essentially, and primarily everything I talk about is mostly here in the States, the United States, but this is kind of typical for us. These are just a pair of wean to finish livestock buildings and hogs. So the two buildings together would hold about 5,000 pigs and generate roughly about 1 million gallons of manure. And eventually it'll need to be hauled at some point. In the area of dairy, usually most new dairy farms that we see being built in the States are somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 dairy cows. Perhaps bigger when you go further west, where they don't really need to worry about moisture issues like we do in the eastern part. But we don't have a quota system, so our dairies are quite large to survive, so to speak. And that leads to very large manure storages. The one we're looking at here would easily be 50 million gallons, probably possibly more than 60. And we base that upon the fact that we collect all the manure, the milk house water, the runoff water, the rainfall that comes in contact with feed, the silage leachate, and that adds up to probably in a neighborhood of 35 to 40 gallons per cow per day. And we collect all of that, and all of that has to be land applied at some point. As we asked people to go further with manure, we put more and more on tankers. Only reason I'm showing this one, I just thought it was cute the way the dust was thrown up. You know, that house to the right-hand side is not part of the farm. So I'm sure if each tanker had been blowing the dust directly on the house, they wouldn't have been too thrilled with that. This is another one where a person's just pulling up to empty. You can see a little bit of manure has been splashed on the road. But again, we're talking about a rural road. If traffic were coming the other way, they would slow down and drive around, and we would do fine with that as well. Again, pretty common to either use hoses or use tankers. But as we go a step further with that, this is one where you've got a tanker that's pulled off on a busy highway, and you've got the tanker is facing into the oncoming traffic. They don't have any cones out in particular. The cars that are coming toward us have to slow down, peek around that semi. I think we open ourselves up to a lot of liability potential. Plus, you know, our tankers and stuff cost money to operate, to run. And even on top of that, we couldn't hardly find enough people to operate tankers this year. We were very short all summer long. So the manure people were looking for drivers. The silage harvesters were looking for drivers. Everybody was looking for drivers this year. And then it was mentioned before by Andy, road damage. You know, a lot of our rural roads are beat up pretty badly when livestock facilities are built, when the concrete trucks are coming in and out. Then after they've got them built, then we're going to be hauling feed in and out. We're going to haul silage and haylage. We're going to haul manure. We're going to haul grain. There's just a lot of things that a lot of our rural roads just don't handle this very well. And in Ohio and in most of the United States, our township trustees are responsible for roads in counties and townships. So they usually get very happy with us. And then also, even though we may do a very, very good job of recycling our nutrients, not everybody is as appreciative of the efforts we put into reapplying nutrients from the soil they came from. And you often get concerned people, you know, opposition groups. These people oftentimes smell with their nose, as we've said many, many times. And when they see manure trucks running in and out of a livestock facility close to them, they're very likely to be quite alarmed and call in complaints and those types of things. So the question was, what would be the pros and cons, and how might we look at trying to transport manure through a solid hose underground that we bury, a permanent fixture, so to speak. As we look at that, we have to think a little bit about flow rates and things. One of the dairies near me has a half mile of buried line. He buried an 8-inch line more than 10 years ago, and it was rated at 150 PSI. And the commercial applicator that he works with loves the underground hose because it saves him putting out additional hoses. But he'll also say that the gallonage is nearly what he wants. He wants to run better than 2,500 gallons per minute. And so he has to back down to about 1,500 gallons a minute because of the 8-inch hose. And instead of running 250 PSI, which is pretty common for him because he has very large equipment, he has to back that down to the 150 PSI of the rating of the hose. So just something to keep in mind as you plan ahead. And again, you know, there's head loss in hoses, there's restriction, but I just want to point out the diameter, you know, with just a 2-inch increase really increases your gallons per minute that you can get through a hose. So I had listed here some thoughts that I had. I think that if we do decide that we're going to put in a permanent fixed hose, it needs to be located where it's going to be the most beneficial. I had put down here, if a person had built a satellite pond 4 or 5 miles away that could be alternative storage, that might be a good argument for a fixed hose. Or if there was a manure processor, which we do not have any, but there's always rumors of the possibility of manure processors going in, could also be an argument for that. Just be sure it's the size and diameter and strength that you need, especially 10 years down the road. We've changed quite a bit in the past 10 years. Commercial manure applicators that could do 500,000 gallons a day now do 1 million gallons a day. those, everybody, it's like an arms race. We continue to upgrade on our efficiency of manure application. And it's necessary. If you're going to pull into one of those 50 million gallon manure storages, you can't expect to sit there for 2 months and pump continuously. They want you to get in there, get her done, and get out eventually. So something to keep in mind. I talked to our commercial manure applicator that works with a couple of the pipes that we're aware of. He just said that you cannot let the sand settle in the bottom of those things between uses. So even if you think you're going to come back and use that in another 2 months, he still makes sure that we blow out those fixed hoses just so the sand doesn't settle in the bottom of those things, because it's going to be more difficult to get out later. And then we put down here to keep it below the frost line. Again, just in case it does get moisture inside of it, it's not blown out properly or something like that. We certainly wouldn't want it to freeze and crack along the hose. This is a picture about 30 miles from me. This is not the half-mile hose. This is a large dairy that buried 2 hoses that would be less than a quarter mile in length. But he buried them so that the commercial applicators, he can have 2 commercial applicators hook on at the same time of different ends, and then there's no hoses around the buildings. There's nothing for the semis to drive across or to work around. The feed trucks don't have to work around any commercial manure applicator hoses that would be laying in the driveway or wrapped around the buildings. So he put the underground pipes in strictly to get everything moved away from the farm. So he's got more space to work with and stuff. We had, I was just drove by a spot 2 years ago where they're getting ready to put in some water lines to feed. Kind of made a nice picture, kind of imagine what it would be like to put in a manure line for that purpose. I've got a backhoe listed here, but probably in our rural areas, if we don't have too much to dodge around, we'll probably be able to use a trencher to put in a manure line versus using a backhoe. A trencher would be a little more efficient perhaps. So something to keep in mind there. I put down positives, I thought, for the livestock producer. And this is also in talking with our livestock producer who has the half-mile hose. Less mess near the farm itself. You don't have you're not loading, you don't have the trucks going in and out, you don't have manure in your driveway from drippage. So he said happy neighbors is a point he would like to make. Township trustees would tell you that anything that reduces road damage would make them happy. Initially, when our large farms come in, there's a lot of anger and frustration and disappointment at people that chose to live out in the countryside and avoid city taxes, city sewer, city water, things like that. But nothing keeps them madder after 2 or 3 years than road damage, because most other issues kind of go away on their own, but the road damage is a big one. I have down here reduced liability, few trucks on the road. Right now, we're somewhere between 125 is about the minimum to have truckers in, but some guys have said that if they provide the tanker, the truck, and themselves, they would be closer to $250 an hour. And those are in US dollars. Oops. We've also got down here an appreciation of the buried line. That'd be a positive. You can appreciate it out. I put down here perhaps safer from some of your Amity livestock people. We've had issues where people have caused vandalism to manure hoses or caused them to rupture because, again, as we're stretched out 2 or 3 or 4 miles from a source of manure, you cannot keep an eye on that hose all the time. And we've had a couple of times when brand new hoses have ruptured, and we suspect that somebody probably helped that to happen, especially when it gets dark and you can't see very far. And then I put down here toward the bottom, because this is more my bailiwick, perhaps use more manure from that source in season to help pay for this. We do a lot of work with side dressing corn with manure and replacing the purchased side dress nitrogen. We do a lot of surface application to newly planted corn in the state of Ohio. That's, again, it's a time of year, in May when most dairies have a lot of liquid on hand. We can splatter that on top of the corn. And then applying it to forages between cuttings is another, I think, good use of manure, a way of putting coin in your pocket, help pay for that. And this is just a short video on side dressing corn. We usually do this up until the V4 stage of corn. And this usually has worked out pretty well for us for the most part. Again, this is dairy manure going directly between the corn rows, able to make that work out pretty well. Here's just somebody that's doing the very same thing with liquid dairy manure on alfalfa between cuttings. Again, you know, swine finishing manure is certainly higher in nutrients than dairy manure, but you can get some nice boosts on regrowth from using manure in these types of fashions. And then the other place we use a lot of manure in Ohio is we try to surface apply to wheat in sometime in March or April before it really starts to joint. So again, all of those could add some value to the manure if you are so inclined to use it that way. The positives that I wrote down, I talked to a couple manure applicators. They like the idea of the underground hose simply because they wouldn't be unrolling as much of their hose when they come to a farm. They think connecting onto those things is relatively easy. They thought maybe you might want to have a pop-up or connector every mile or so, both for clean out purposes and for hooking into them. If they are responsible for the trucks, they thought fewer semi-trucks would be a real positive in that instance. I had a commercial applicator who had a contract of bio-lime this summer. He had a whole 23 million gallons of bio-lime, a distance of about 25 miles. And so we usually figure about 1 truck per mile when we're tanking manure or tanking something like that. And so he never could find more than 11 semis at any time. So a project he thought would take a certain number of days or weeks ended up being way more than double, because some days he would only have 6 semis running in that loop. Again, I put the reduced liability trucks unloading on the roadsides. Most people are pretty good about slowing down to that, but we all have that distracted driving instance where we could have been guilty. And then less labor if we, some of our loading systems that we use with frac tanks require people to hook on and unhook the suction hoses. Some don't. Everybody has their own preferences that we work with. Concerns or things I would be watchful of, trying not to outgrow your system. Whatever we're doing now, will that be enough in 10 years? The one that we have installed, that's the 8-inch, would probably be on the small side. If it were a 10 or a 12, it would be better appreciated. The higher operating pressures, you know, right now we have certain numbers and flow rates and pressures we're comfortable with. Where will we be in 10 years? You know, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. Lose access to ground where the pipe is located. Again, if you're a large dairy or a large livestock facility and you're renting a lot of ground, you know, a lot of times when you envision one of these pipes, you envision it going to a location that would have another 600 or 800,000 acres of ground that you could access. You know, what would happen if you lost that for some reason? Very few people who receive manure turn it down in the years ahead, because really it does improve the soil. I believe that. I talked to an engineer who puts in sewer lines. He thought we could put a 10-inch pipe to handle 50 PSI of pressure for about $158,400. And that's assuming it's a pretty open area. We're not digging under a lot of roads. We're not having to go through people's driveways and stuff like that. As an alternative, I talked to a couple people and got a quote. You can buy soft hose. Here's 12-inch diameter soft hose for about $96,000, or you could get 10-inch diameter soft hose for $72,000. So you can see where the soft hoses, and again, we'd have to have hose darts to go with those, but you can see the soft is quite cheaper than a fixed hose. But again, we have to set those up every year. We have to store them. You know, are they going to be owned by the commercial applicator or the dairy itself, or who would own those? There's just an example of a 10-inch line that's been laid, and most of our commercial applicators are getting more serious about getting their gallons in have gone to 10 or 20. And that's really helped us to not need near the booster pumps that we needed years ago to go out that far. And the other thing we're big on is crossover. Not everybody able to do this, but most of our rural areas, the township trustees are pretty favorable to crossovers such as this, because they would rather see the manure travel in those hoses than they would see it going down the driveways or in the roads. Sometimes we lay these hoses across ditches. Sometimes we lay them on top of the roads, and we close them for, you know, a day or so. Again, if it's a square mile situation like many of our roads are, it's not that big a deal to drive around them. As I look at that, I look at pros and cons of fixed pipe. I just know that the cost of transport manures continue to increase. Everything's gone up for us quite a bit. In the last year, I know commercial applicators are talking about the prices of hoses, the prices of equipment. I think that favors putting something in place in the ground that's going to stay in good shape and will last a long, long time. Also think our liability costs are going to continue to rise. You know, we buy insurance for manure spills. We buy insurance for accidents and things like that. But I think that that's probably going to continue to go up as people try to take advantage of the legal system. I think we want to plan for the future as best possible. It's not easy to do. I would emphasize that as we grow in size, we travel greater distances for feed sources. We're going to need to travel greater distances to put that manure back on. You know, we've done a lot of voluntary stuff in the States for many, many years. Lots of people clamoring for rules and regulations more than ever. Governing manure application things. And so with that, that was pretty much my summary or my talk. I will stop sharing my screen and we can open her up for questions.
That's excellent, Glenn. Really appreciate that. You had some excellent photos that really helped to put it into perspective, what you're talking about there. So I'm going to invite Mel and Andy to come back on the screen, bring your cameras up. And just while they're doing that, Glenn, I noticed, I think it was the first photo you had of one of the lagoons. And if my eyes serve me correctly, it looked like the agitator in the lagoon was one of the Noon lagoon crawlers, which is actually manufactured just down the road from where Andy is. Correct, Andy?
Yes, it is about 5 miles away.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's a neat manufacturing story, Southwestern Ontario. And actually, interesting fact, they sold their first lagoon crawler at the first North American Manure Expo held in Ontario back in 2013. And at the most recent North American Manure Expo, they announced that they had just produced their 500th machine. So that's kind of a neat local manufacturing story for us as well. Yeah, great presentations. A few questions that came up in the chat right away. I want to deal with those first, and then we're gonna open it up for you folks to discuss some of this stuff further. Andy, I think this first one is for you, a question about, okay, the changing value of fertilizer, which is affecting the value of manure. Does that change our headspace around the distance that people are willing to travel to buy and sell manure?
Yes, great question. So we, based on last year's values, we had we could take a tanker of manure on a round trip about 8 to 9 kilometers, and it made sense. With today's values, I think we could probably bump that up to 14 or 15 kilometers round trip now. It's just everything goes up in tandem as the fertilizer prices rise, so does the value of manure. Yeah, there's definitely you can go further with a load than you could last year, and but that's based on $140 an hour. I know Glenn was talking $125 an hour, but I guess in Canadian, we're about $140 an hour for a tanker truck and a driver. And I've been told that we can expect that to go up by probably $15 an hour. So it's we have the same problem as Glenn has in Ohio. Nobody can find drivers. It's just I think because of the the incident we had out west several years ago with the tractor trailer driver and the school or the hockey bus, horrible accident that now it costs between $8,000 and $10,000 to get somebody AZ licensed. So it's changed exponentially. So I think there's going to be interest in this pipeline thing more and more, just to address the fact that they can't get drivers. So
yeah. And continuing on the pipeline, then the follow-up question or second question was for you, Glenn, specifically. It'd be nice if we were the prairies and everything was straight and flat and so on, but we have some challenges in terms of topography and so on, curving the pipeline up and down, that sort of thing. Can you speak to some of those challenges, and do you actually have to mark the location of where those pipes are buried as well?
In Ohio, we would not have to mark the location of the pipes, but anybody that wanted to remember where they were, as you change ownership, change managers, change manure applicators, that would be handy information to have. Probably in the States, there's a colony out in Iowa called the AMANA, AMANA colony. And the last I had heard, I talked to one of their ex-farm managers last week. They had 9 miles of buried pipe in their colony, because they do it because they didn't want to run trucks through towns hauling manure. So they had elevations of upwards of 40 feet that they had to overcome. So there is head loss in those instances when you're going to start pumping manure up slopes and things like that. But again, it'd take an engineer to know for sure how much we're talking about. But generally, I would think that anything you guys would have mostly in Canada would be close to what we have in Ohio, and close to certainly less slope than what they have in Iowa. So I would encourage somebody to reach out to that Amana colony and talk to someone who does their manure work. They really thought those pipes paid for themselves in just 3 years or so.
Wow. Well, and I expect we'll come back to some of the technical things we're talking about here, but can we go back to where we started with Mel, and really this whole thing comes down to connecting people together, right? A buyer, a seller, possibly transporter, brokers in between, but so on. Mel, comment further. So you suggested an app, and that obviously is something, I don't know what you'd call it. Maybe you can't say what you would call it. Maybe you've got something up your sleeve already, but I think that's one of the first challenges, is just this connecting the two parties together. Can we chat on that further?
Oh, I don't even know. I'd be open to hearing what other people want to call the app. Everything I can think of is pretty inappropriate. But yeah, no, it is about connecting. I think it really is about building a relationship too. So I am hesitant that it's just going to be as easy as an app and like, oh, I need manure. Oh, who knew, there's someone right down the road. You, especially in rural communities, you could have a long-standing tension with that person down the road. And so we really need to understand rural communities. And yeah, an app just doesn't solve everything. I don't know. I could talk forever, so I'll stop.
Yeah, so Glenn, when somebody's investing to put a pipeline in the ground, are they just doing that on their own land? Have they got some security that there's going to be a relationship here for the long term? Like that, again, in this context of people and relationships, is one of the things that comes to my mind. Yeah,
I would think you would want to have some sort of a permit to go through the property type thing, where it would stick with it, where somebody who bought it couldn't dig it up and shut it off, type of thing. That's a great question. Most of our larger livestock farms don't have enough ground immediately around them, so they would have to cross someone else's property to install a pipe of much distance at all. So I think that's something that it's going to require a lot of talking with the neighbors, and probably if you would trade them some manure for rite of passage type thing, I think most of them would be pretty receptive to something like that. But the winter months, like Mel would say, the winter months is the time to visit with neighbors and stuff. We have a small grains program where people can be receive money for taking manure here in the state of Ohio. And if nothing else, that got a lot of people talking across the fence, because before, when livestock farmers struggled to find someone to take manure, now people were calling them saying, we're interested. So that was certainly a nice step in the right direction.
I was interested in the photos you were showing near the end there of the pipeline crossing under the road, over the road, temporary closure of the road. I know a few situations where folks have approached their municipality to try to put a permanent pipe in under the road. And you think about this, practically makes so much sense, but it's a difficult thing to do. In fact, almost the barriers are prohibitive, but yeah, you look at it and you go, that just makes sense, but it's hard to do.
Yeah, we're the same way with railroads, and our area railroads are very reluctant to allow anybody to put anything through. And then most of the fiber optic lines that have been laid along railroads. So again, another negative on that. But again, your township trustees, for us anyhow, whoever's in charge of your local roads, when you weigh the pros and cons of all those trucks going down those roads versus laying that pipe under. And then the other thing we do a lot of is we look for any place there's a ditch or a stream or something else that already causes for a culvert. When you're as level as we are in much of the state, we have to get water off fields. To interfere with the flow of water is asking for trouble, because get a heavy enough rain, the water will go anywhere it damn well wants to. So we have a lot of reasons to have culverts under roads anyhow. So we can put commercial manure applicators are quite creative on getting their hose stretched through there. Some take a bow and arrow and they shoot it down the length of that. Some have, pipes they screw together and shove through there until they can reach the other side. So, everyone does the best they can, but we need to be able to get across these roads. We really do, to reach as much ground as we can.
Yeah. I'll just remind everybody, we're still taking questions in the chat. If you have questions, feel free to post them there. And also, if you've had an experience in your area trying to run one of these pipelines, we'd love to hear your comments in the chat on that as well. Andy, do you think the demand for this is growing up in Ontario? Like, is there a growing demand? Are more people looking to get manure, or are more people looking to get rid of manure? What do you see happening there?
Well, in my own situation, I'm finding it harder to acquire manure than I was 5 years ago, because people are starting to realize that people are starting to pay for it. And we live in a livestock intensive area, and there's also cash crop areas or farms in our area, of course. But it's not as easy to find manure as it was in the past. And it's strange how farmers' mindset, when they realize how much value their manure is, they're less likely, more and more reluctant to sell it, because they think there's somebody else is getting what they have. And it's just a mindset of getting I know we have farms in our area that are probably probably running in that 55, 60 ppm for phosphorus, and they're still putting on 4,000 gallons of manure in the spring because they just don't want somebody else. And they really don't need it. They don't need it for another 6 or 7 years, actually. And I think that's the real challenge, is to educate people as to, and we fight on two fronts, actually. You got, in my area, Mitchell Stratford area, you have a very, very competitive farm input circle of people. And, they're a little reluctant to advise people to get rid of their manure and not use any fertilizer. It's just it's just how things work. Crop advisors are basically non-existent in Ontario, because it's all given to you by your input suppliers for free. As far as crop scouting and crop advising, it's pretty rare that you can actually make a living doing that in Ontario, because it's not like in Western Canada where it's all sold. Crop advising is sold, but we just have this little situation in southwestern Ontario where we have very competitive input suppliers, and that's basically who they'll have. The farmer will have their discussion with them in the fall, and then it's difficult to get people to release their manure after that. That's but maybe with these high prices, they'll be more enticed to do so. But I had a question for Glenn. I just wonder, like in Ontario, where we are, we have a lot of creeks and we have a lot of municipal drains, and they can often be anywhere from 6 to 12 feet deep. How do you cross that with a permanent pipe? You go that much deeper underneath?
That'd be my guess. You probably have to. That's what they normally do with natural gas pipes and things like that in the States. They just go below creek beds. Yeah.
And I could see that being a problem with Ministry of Environment here in Ontario. I wonder if you'd actually be able to do that, but I don't know. So they have, if you were making a connection, like, how would you do that under a creek? Or you would block the creek and go below, or is that how you would?
The other option would be to in the
Drill.
pipe there, have it come up out of the ground, and that could be a place where you put a flexible hose on when you're actually going to be using your
Right.
thing. And there's a company in Wisconsin, I've seen them at North American Manure Expo, that builds a basically a thing that goes across creeks and roads and things like that. And that would be another system that could be used in that situation.
Yeah. It's because I only know of one actual pipeline, and Chris knows another one in Embro area, but I know of one close to where I farm, and that's the only two that I know of. And I think it's having to cross other people's land. You would need people to sign an easement. Or how many people would be eager to do that? I'm not sure, but
and you'd have to. We're really big on subsurface drainage, so you'd have to certainly fix any damage you cause to the subsurface drainage system in the area too.
Yeah. I'm going to put my phone on mute here. I got to get in the truck and I'll come back on.
Oh,
Be right back.
Andy does have another commitment right at 3, so we appreciate him staying on here. But
I had another point there, Andrew. Building on what Andy was saying about the crop advisors, like the 4R nutrient stewardship program is really great, and I do see potential there. It makes me wonder if the crop advisors could be a better role of brokers. If their mandate was just to work with the fertility, whether it came from fertilizer or manure, that they're already integrated into the communities, that maybe that's where there's another leverage point there.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that, Andy. You could probably comment on that.
I didn't hear that. I'm rushing to get ready here.
I'll call you later, Andy.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mel, put it in the app. Make sure the app is set up that way that it.
Yeah, no, exactly. You got to really understand why it hasn't worked so far.
One of the things, Andy, you did talk about, which I found interesting, was with the edibles, that it's the value of the microbes that was really being placed high, and actually using that for setting the value. I thought that was very interesting. And I guess it brings to mind the question in the chat here, which is, do you think there are folks who actually place value on anything other than the macros, the N, P, and K? So organic matter and the biology and the microbes. Do you think many people look at it that way?
No, they don't. They look at the N, P, and K, and that's about it. But I know as an edible bean grower, that's where the real value is for us. And that's just a matter of making people aware of it. It's just, I don't think a lot of people are aware of the fact that the vitamin mineral premixes are no more than 25%, 30% utilized, and the rest is flow through. So that's where that comes from. And when you're buying commercial fertilizer, you're basically getting the N, P, and K with the carrier, which is usually clay or sand. And that's all you get.
Right.
That's what the value of manure is, I think.
Glenn, you comment on that as well from your side of the border?
Well, I'd say that we rarely, I'll be honest with you, hardly anybody pays squat for manure right now yet. Oftentimes I'll say, well, we'll pick up half the cost of application, or we'll allow you to put it on our field. So, you know, again, farmers with the prices of corn will buy these very expensive micronutrient packages in a heartbeat if they thought that would get them 3 or 4 more bushels per acre. And that's the same stuff that's already in this manure. So, you know, manure is a heck of a deal, no matter where you are in the States. I mean, it's just rare that anybody pays anything close to what it actually brings to the table.
Yeah. So I'm going to step in here, guys, because we are at the 1 hour. So I am going to post the QR code for the CCAs. I don't want to cut off the conversation if there's other comments to make, but I am going to post that right now, just so folks can claim their CEU credits. So there's the QR code. I will leave that up for 1 minute. And Mel or Glenn or Andy, if you have some final comments you want to make, you'd be welcome to do that.
Yeah, how do we get more acceptance of the value of manure? That would be the challenge, I think, for people to realize how valuable it actually is and be willing to pay for it. That's, I guess, we have to come around on that. But I think it'd be easier to sell manure now with the values of fertilizer than it was in the past, for sure.
Right on. Glenn, any closing comments?
Just that the media, I think, hurts our manure in Northwest Ohio because the media seems to connect manure with algae issues in Lake Erie as a 1-to-1. And that's very, very far from the truth. And I think that you know, if we can figure out better ways to get manure on the fields, you know, right now we kind of sit on a lot of manure until fall, and we get ourselves behind the 8 ball sometimes, and fields aren't in very good shape. So if anything we can do to raise small grains and things like that, allow us to get on these fields in summertime when they're more firm, would be time well spent.
Excellent. And Mel, final closing comments from you.
Just that it's community by community base. And yeah, I'm interested in building an app. If anyone wants to join me, give me a call. And yeah, thanks for having this conversation, Andrew.
Okay, well, I don't think Christine Brown has trademarked the term Uber manure. So maybe that could be the name of your app.
We'll see.
All right, with that, we'll close out. Thank you to everybody for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next Monday. And our topic next Monday is phosphorus and manure, and that's with Maren McRae. That session was presented at the North American Manure Expo, but we will have Maren live with us there to take questions. So we look forward to seeing you again next Monday. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, Andrew. Nice to meet you, Glenn. Goodbye.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all.
Bye.
Well, looks like you had a nice group on today.
I'm like, stop recording.
Yeah, I was waiting for that.